Welcome back to Off the Pitch, the podcast where we chat with individuals working within and shaping the game of soccer from off the pitch. Today's guest is Nick Ragain. Nick is currently the president of USL Championship side Colorado Springs Switchbacks. Having been with the club since its inception in 2013, Nick gave David and I a true behind the scenes of what it's been like to not only start but grow a professional sports club from the ground up. Having not been a big soccer guy prior to starting the Switchbacks, Nick had to not only learn the game itself, but more importantly the business side of sport from scratch. He let us know a lot of the trials and challenges that he's had to overcome in this past decade, how he looks to forge relationships with people like the community, their fans, and city officials such as the mayor in order to bring the vision and the idea to life. He let us know what it was like to build a stadium from scratch in 2021 and much more about what this journey has included for him, his family, and the entire Switchbacks organization since starting just over 10 years ago. I know that you're going to learn a lot in this episode, but you're also going to be extremely entertained as Nick has truly seen it all in this journey so far. So, with all of that said, let's start this episode. Okay, well, Nick, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the podcast. We're very excited to speak with you and hear about your story, the story of the Switchbacks, that you've been there from before day one until present day. So obviously we know a bit about you, yourself, your background, the club, but for anyone who maybe doesn't know who you are, they've never heard of you or your name or the Switchbacks for that matter that might be listening, would you mind just running through some details about who Nick Ragain is as a person, and of course a bit of your background, your career, and how you've gotten to where you are and what you're doing?
Sure. Always take advantage and look forward to talking about the Switchbacks, what we've done here, and certainly proud, but there's always a lot of work in this field to be done, so it's never done. But yeah, so when you think about the Switchbacks, when you think about Nick Ragain, it's really a bigger story about the Ragain family. Starting in sports, probably late 80s, a company that my dad started, it was called ME Engineers. ME Engineers is and today, one of the larger mechanical electrical design firms in the US. And one of the things that put them in that position was actually stadium design development. They developed relationships with some big sports architects, and through those sports architect relationships, the Tropicana Dome, which Hurricane Milton just destroyed, that was one of their first projects, and then Camden Yards, and then Coors Field here in Denver. And at the time I was a kid, I was in the office redlining drawings, making blueprint copies in an ammonia-filled room because nobody else wanted to do that kind of thing. But that's where I became exposed. You guys said you're from the Bay Area. I remember Pac Bell Park was a huge set of drawings that I got to thumb through and look as that facility was under construction. And I was in my teen years seeing that come together. And by the way, I just saw that facility when I went to the Oakland game. Had to grab a Giants game as well earlier this year with my son. But sports and sports stadiums has always been a big part of our family since I was a kid. And I didn't anticipate working in soccer like we've done for these last 10 years when I was younger. I grew up west of Denver, Colorado, and in the mountains, these mountain towns, we didn't have a soccer program. We had football, basketball, baseball. I played those sports and a little bit of college football. I was involved in sports, both as coaching, and sales marketing is a lot of where I spent most of my career. A big chunk of that, I worked for Musco Sports Lighting. That's out of Iowa, a sales and marketing rep here in this region, project manager. I moved, I shouldn't say I moved. I had some health issues in the late 2000s, and I decided to go off on my own. I bought a franchise, and this was my first, soiree into owning a franchise, and I hated it. It was a poor decision. This franchise, it had no name. The market, as I came to market, nobody knew it. And so if they're not familiar with it, what are you really buying? You're building somebody else's brand. And so I ended up kind of breaking off from that, but kind of um, basically ended up becoming a WordPress developer, but touching on a lot of different tech spaces. And I was interested in the space. This was right when the first iPad came out. And as I'm looking, I needed something where I didn't have to travel so much. And I liked the digital space. I liked how content was now being consumed and distributed. It was just really interesting to me. And I needed to be able to work from anywhere. And so with that in mind, bought the franchise. And so was exposed to maybe 30, 40, 50 different companies, looking and working in how those companies operated, from bookkeeping to communication to data storage to content development and generation and management. And, I learned a lot in my 3 years. And then my dad, and this is what's unusual about me. This isn't something that the listeners can learn, but because we are a family business and an opportunity presented itself, pretty much my job was to say yes to the opportunity versus no because I didn't like franchises. But so being in that business for 3 years, and then my father was selling ME engineers to employees and said, I was doing some work for Major League Soccer. They communicated that they're about to do a deal with this league called the USL, and now might be a really interesting time to get involved in this sports franchise. It was a little off the wall for this communication between him and I. There was not a lot of preparation for it, other than knowing he's in a transition process, and it took a little while to get on board with it. But the reason I said yes is just seeing from an entrepreneur standpoint, understanding how difficult it is to launch and to grow a business and to, do what you need to do in the market. Working with somebody who has done that on a large scale and had success, I wanted to be involved in a day-to-day and see what made my dad different in that space. And so that's why I said yes. The league, interestingly enough, we came, both Ed and myself. We went to Tampa, met with Alec and some of the folks at the USL, and the first thing we said was, we have a lot of sports design, we're connected to sports for many, many years in different ways, but really we're entrepreneurs. Really, that's the space that we've lived and been involved in. And if you think that that's a good pairing with purchasing and opening and developing a franchise, then that could work. If you need us to be soccer experts, then you're probably not going to be interested in us in expanding here in Colorado. And the feedback that we got from the league at that time was, we have a lot of people that love the game and a lot of people that come into this owning a franchise from a love standpoint. The problem is it's really expensive. You launch these franchises, you guys have been interviewing different people. I don't know what kind of perspectives you've gotten, but it's investment heavy. And the league said, we really are interested in partnering with entrepreneurs that care about selling tickets, care about selling sponsorships, that care about the right venues in the right locations, to put on. And actually, those are my words a little bit more, because I think the league, I don't think, used that language, the right venues in the right locations, but that was certainly our perspective. We knew even Colorado Springs was not going to work if we didn't have the right venue in the right location. I think the league was more interested in selling franchises, but that was always our perspective. We came into the Colorado Springs Switchbacks saying, okay, here's a near-term venue. We think we can, put this project together. If we have, success, maybe this is the long-term, opportunity on the east side of town, more suburban Colorado Springs, but really downtown, like urban type of setting. This is where we really want to be, and we'll see how it goes. It took us, over 7 years to get downtown where I'm sitting today. But because of Widener Field, the stadium that we built, 8,000 seats, We feel like we're, playing a part of playing an important role in growing the game in the United States. Because if you can't put the game on in the right environment and can't create the right environment for fans, they aren't going to understand what's so unique and special about the game and what's different about the game. And if they don't understand those things, then they won't come back. And so about 90% of our season ticket members here in Colorado Springs, this is their first exposure to professional soccer. Most of them had kids play. They probably understand most of the game, still struggle with the clock, still struggle with offsides. But outside of those things, this is their first experience with it. And so it's been really amazing to see the growth and the interest of the game here. And as an example of that, this last Saturday, it was an unfortunate loss for us. We were in a nice position. There was and of course, this is my team, there was a questionable officials call, and the entire stadium was in an uproar. It's never been like that. The passion that is beginning to grow in and behind the players, in and behind our coaching staff, in and behind the franchise is pretty awesome to see, because here's this group of people that's mostly and Colorado. What's interesting about our market is that we're only 70 miles from Denver, and Colorado Springs has historically seen themselves generally as a suburb. If anything important has happened, it happens in Denver. Any identity that we have is actually wrapped up in Denver. And what we've always been trying to communicate to our market of 500,000 people is that we're a big enough market, guys, to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and have some pride in who we are and what we do and tell the world about it. And so that's what we've been trying to drive home through the Switchbacks and through sport. And it's been really fun to be a part of and to see it grow. But it has many challenges and still requires plenty of investment.
Yeah, I'm sure. And we'll dig into those challenges as we get into things. But I'm glad you mentioned the change that you've seen of fans getting not into the referees or anything, but getting behind the team's bad moments, if you will, right? Because
They're
I think
passionate.
that's when you can see the real fans. Anyone can celebrate a goal, anyone can celebrate a win, but when someone gets chopped down on the halfway line and there's not a free kick called or there's a penalty called against you, and then the fans who erupt against the referee, against that call, those are the ones that actually you can tell care truly about both sides of that coin. Of they're not just going to celebrate the goals that everyone will clap for, but they're also feeling the pain of a bad decision. So that's awesome. So obviously we'll get into the last 10 years and everything that has happened, but take us back to 2013 when you secured a franchise, and then between then and the first game in the USL in 2015, what did those first day conversations look like in terms of, right now we have a team, but we don't have a team. We have a family
Right.
that have a team. But how do we move forward? What are the first few steps we have to take? What does that plan look like? What does a checklist, a roadmap look like to get us from here, the Ragain family, to 2015, 11 players on the pitch, a bench, coaches, fans, front office? Talk us through all of that.
Yeah, and it's fun just to go back and think about that, because there was a lot of work and there was a lot of effort. A lot of those questions we had to answer with our franchise application. So we started the process in July and we closed on the process in late November and announced in December. It was interesting. Those were the times, if you remember, Orlando City was still in the USL, and Orlando's the first USL game that we watched. We went to go see the Orlando City versus the Charlotte. I forget what the Charlotte team was. It's not the Independents. It was the forerunner, the Eagles. And they were playing in the Citrus Bowl, and they played in the Citrus Bowl in front of like 20,000 people. And it was a pretty fantastic event. And my dad and I are, sitting here taking all this in and saying, wow, this, there's really great opportunities here. I don't think there's been a game that's been played in the USL in front of more than 20,000 people. So that was certainly, that match was a unique high water mark that we attended as our first match. But we used a lot of that energy to help get people excited here in Colorado Springs about what the potential were, both from the franchise, but also from the growth of the game. We never, and recognized from the beginning, we never tried to sell Major League Soccer. We know Colorado Springs is not a Major League Soccer market, which made it a little challenging for us to, cast that huge vision out there that get people really excited. But we were careful not to do that because we know we're not an MLS market. So anyways, we worked through establishing what could be our venue. The venue is the number one issue. And U.S. Soccer actually used to be located in Colorado Springs. You probably know the USOPC is located here. There's a lot of national governing bodies of sport that are located here. I think like 23. Tennis, swimming, volleyball, all these different sports. Soccer was located here until 1991. But what they left behind was a field, a full-size field that had good bones, but it wasn't, the seating bowl wasn't built out. They turned the facility over to the city when they left in 1991. The city had done some improvements, added some lighting, but it still wasn't at a professional grade. So we knew that number one, we needed a lease with the city. And then number two, we needed to invest and bring it up to some minimum standards, minimum guidelines. And it was pretty interesting working on the facility because on one hand, you had my dad, Ed Ragain, who had worked on the biggest stadiums on the planet. And then on the other hand, you had me that had worked on, a range of size of facilities in Colorado and very familiar in Wyoming and New Mexico, but very familiar how you do facility design development on a budget. And so it was really interesting blend of experiences because we, purchased a lot of items directly. We were able to save a lot of costs and do things efficiently because of some of the things I had seen and witnessed. And then on the flip side, some of the relationships that Ed had developed. I mean, we had Populous, the largest sports architect on the planet, do the site design for our 5,000 seat stadium on the east side of Colorado Springs. And they did that as a favor because they don't do projects like that. General contractor, we had a long-standing relationship with, worked with us. The electrical design engineer and mechanical, that was a company that, he had owned. And so there was a lot of relationships and we did that both at that site, but also with downtown to be as efficient as we possibly could. But, securing the lease with the city, getting them on board with the idea of a professional team. One of the most frustrating times was that facility was located right next to, at the time, the Sky Sox was a AAA baseball team that was located here in town. Since then, they've moved to actually San Antonio, and we have an unaffiliated team that occupies that venue now. But as we were pitching the idea of this lease and renovation to the city, in front of city council, the owner of that team and that franchise and a lot of other sports franchises got up and said that we were going to be a detriment to their business. And that was a frustrating moment because for a number of different reasons. I actually, grew up, very familiar with baseball, but because of these interactions, because of these relationships with some of our neighbors, it was actually really tough to go watch baseball for many years because, they had just burned bridges with me. But anyways, the city understood the value and we got past some of those challenges. But securing the franchise was the biggest issue to start with. Of course, then we get into, what's the name gonna be? And are we gonna have a mascot? What's the logo gonna look like? And so it was a pretty fun process. We had obviously our core family, and what we tried to do is make sure that from an ownership standpoint, we wanted as much as possible the community and community members to feel ownership. We didn't want to be this little bubble of we're creating our own little thing and come and enjoy our great ideas. that was not something that we were trying to do. We were trying to bring people, and I think that's a pretty common approach. And so we did a big naming contest in January after we did the announcement in December. And we had 700 name submissions from the community, all kinds of different ideas. We put them into 5 categories. We picked the top 5 that we liked, and then we sent it back out. And the community picked Switchbacks. And the lady that added that name to the list was from the Visitors Bureau, who knows nothing about soccer. And she every time I see her, she's still, giving a wink and, taking some credibility for the name, the Switchbacks, because ultimately is really a strong name. The Switchbacks, as I was doing, I was actually doing a lot of, IP background on the different 5 names. What can you really own? Because you not only you own a team, but you own that name. You're going to own a brand, but how do you own a name that you're not competing with somebody else? Some of the other ideas, Colorado Springs FC, that could have been a strong name that didn't win out, but that could have been a strong name. But then you had others, and the others, the Rangers, there were some others, there was a few others that had good reasons to name the franchise. However, we were competing with so many other brands that we really couldn't own that space. And so the Switchbacks was a very unique name, and it was something that we can own, and we're the only Switchbacks on the planet as far as I know when it comes to sports franchises. And if you look west from downtown where I sit, the mountains right here next to Pikes Peak are just, covered with these Switchbacks in the mountains. So we have like a big sign that like that is, what we are. So that was a cool process, the naming process. We did some fun things with the with mascot, and mascot was one of these where the purists said you don't want a mascot, and we ended up doing a mascot anyways. Um, but we sent out, we asked art teachers from around the community to have the kids draw and come up with different ideas. And so we had a bunch of ideas, bunch of drawings that came in, and we ended up picking a goat. So Ziggy is our mascot, and Ziggy, he is, as far as mascots go, I think we have the best one. He's been our mascot since day one. Actually, I was the first one to dress up in the mascot and go out to an event, but very, very quickly turned that job over to another person, and he's fantastic. But that's business startup. You got to be interested and willing to do anything, and that's certainly what we were open and willing to do from the beginning. From a competitive standpoint, I'm sure you're interested in how do non-soccer owners develop the soccer side, and it was a pretty straightforward process. Peter Malore was the league's technical director at that time. And we sat down with Peter and, had him give us some ideas and really bring us candidates that he thought, would do well for us. And it was actually a pretty short conversation because there was a person in our market, Steve Trichu, who had played for the men's national team. I think he was the first American to play in Champions League for Sparta Prague. And he, the first men's team to make the World Cup. And he'd been in the market. He played with the Rapids for a number of years, and he was a coach in the market. He was the ideal candidate with the background, with the connections, to be able to build and launch a franchise. So we hired Steve. He was probably our 5th employee. And at the time, our office, even though we were building for Colorado Springs, was located west of Denver because that's just where we were all living. And so those early days, I think there was 4 of us. Steve was in the office. My wife was working in the office as well, and my sister was at the front desk. And that's kind of what it was. And as Steve was building the team over the course of that 2014 season, we were working on all the other things, bringing on staff, staffing up, doing all those normal business startup things. The biggest being how do we put on, these big events, and how do we make it exciting and attract ticket buyers and attract sponsors. That's what I was thinking about. Steve was thinking about how do we put a team together on this budget that you've given me. So that's how it started. It was pretty small, but it was pretty special. It was a fun time. A lot of explored a lot of different ideas. our brand launch was pretty awesome. But yeah.
That's amazing. When it came to, you know, crafting, you have a clean slate, right? So
Yeah.
you're not coming into something where you have to work with what already exists or try and rebrand and change it. We've spoken with people who have had that situation, but you had the complete clean slate, the beauty of getting to decide everything of how to move forward. When it came to deciding what sort of identity you wanted the club to have, the culture of the club, both, you know, internally with the staff, the team, the players, and everyone, but also with the fans, with the community. Were there any other references of other teams, other, you know, leagues and sports in around Colorado, outside of the US that you were looking at as, you know, inspiration of sort of, you know, you hear that a lot of when you're starting something of sort of curating the best things you find in 10 different areas, and now you have a unique situation yourself. Was there anything like that that you were looking at for trying to figure it all out as someone who wasn't a soccer guy or a soccer family, but also just how do we craft this identity?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that was around, yeah, branding and like what do we want the look and feel to be like? I tell you, Sacramento Republic, well, actually also starting with Orlando City. Phil Rollins from Orlando City was very helpful in our startup because one of our first sponsors was our local hospital system. Now it's Common Spirit. They've been with us since day one. So a year before we had a team, Common Spirit was on board sponsoring us, and a lot of that was because of Phil Rollins at the time, and I think they still have Orlando Health as one of their primary sponsors. And so those early conversations and how those conversations need to be happening and what value that the health system would get and how do we, create a good relationship here. Yeah, a lot of that came from Phil Rollins in Orlando City. Then we spent a lot of time with Warren from Sacramento. And, Warren, his first season for Sacramento Republic was in 2014. And they had a spectacular launch. And in their very first year, they won the USL Championship. They had an amazing launch. They had an amazing year. They were putting, they were in a different venue, but they were putting, I think, 12 to 15,000 people regularly into their stadium. Understanding that we're a small market, every different idea that we took, we always kind of tried to boil down and to simplify. One of the things that Sacramento, as I was saying before, they had this, like Orlando City, they had this runway of hope to run onto a Major League Soccer franchise. So a lot of the energy that was bubbling up around it was this runway, this trajectory about where we're going. We had to, that wasn't our runway, so we had to kind of boil it down for ourselves. But Warren and Sacramento, they did a fantastic job. We modeled a lot of our early budgets off of what their budgets were, just scaled it down because we're a smaller market, we had a smaller venue. Oklahoma City, it was also their first year. Bob Funk was there and worked and built and developed that franchise. And so we looked and went to, so we went and visited, had a lot of conversations. But mostly for us, because we're in the USL Championship, to try to keep it USL focused and competitive with the league's best, we really focused here locally in the United States as developing our franchise models. But we had through the league, Jake Edwards, who is the president of the league for a long time, uh, really bouncing a lot of ideas off of him. And Jake was able to boil down ideas from across the globe and, kind of boil them down for what's best for the USL Championship. And one of the things that Jake said that was spot on that we strayed from was when we were developing our logo. The one thing Jake said was just don't put a ball in the logo. Don't do that. Everybody will figure it out. Trust me. And our graphic designer really argued the other side of that for a number of reasons, and we get to make our own decisions and whatnot. But we had the ball in the logo, and a few years later, we were like, yeah, Jake was so right on that point. We really need to pull that out. When we open up our stadium downtown, we did a brand we kind of cleaned up the brand and the logo and the colors and all those things. So we pulled the ball out at that point. But it was so that, different pockets. We were really focused on learning from people in the league that were successful, and then tapping into the league and people that were connected like Jake and yeah, Peter Malore in that global game, and how do we bring that global game to Colorado Springs? So, um, and on the facility side, I would say when it comes to stadium design development, there was a lot of taking big picture ideas and trying to boil it down to what we could do, both out at our old stadium that's now named after my dad. It's Martin Ed Reagan Field now. But then also for this facility, and one of those was an elevated concourse. We weren't going to compete in a stadium that had a walk-up seating experience, so that you walk in at field level and then walk up to your seat. That's a very amateur, very high school type of feel to a venue, and it's a very simple idea, but it actually has significant implications and ramifications on the overall experience and the professionalism experience of the fan. And so both at the old stadium and this stadium, it was a walk down to your seat, an elevated concourse where you can see what's going on, and it brings really a lot of people together. That intimacy is really important in the sport. So we took those big global things and tried to boil them down for our venue.
Yeah, you guys have done just a great job across basically every facet of starting the club. I was lucky enough, I actually went to UCCS for a semester.
Did you?
Yeah, back in
Did you
2017.
play?
I know I didn't play. I played for the club team for the semester that I was there.
Okay.
But I had a chance not to go to a Switchbacks game, but to go to a Sky Sox game because I
Okay.
was also a part of the sports management program. Um,
Fantastic.
So I did get a chance to see the stadium, not be inside of it, of the old stadium, but I did get a chance to see, and that was my first experience was going to your next door neighbors to a baseball game
Yeah.
and seeing everything and being like, wait a second, there's like a big soccer team here. Like, what's going on? You guys did a fantastic job of branding everything outside of the stadium to make sure that your guys' presence was absolutely just as big, if not bigger than your next door neighbors, which was awesome to see. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to do before I left was go to a Switchbacks game. Because I wanted to see what it was like. I've grown up in the Bay Area and also a little bit in Houston where we've had bigger market MLS teams my whole life. So I've seen those games, but I really wanted to see what it was like in the USL. I had never been to a USL game, and you guys, from my understanding, because I had known a few people that had gone to games, did a great job from the get go. So I can't wait to go back because I want to go back to Colorado Springs. It's a great town. I love Pikes Peak and the Garden of the Gods, and I need to go back and see it again. But everything you guys have done is fantastic, especially the name being Switchbacks. I don't know. You touched on it a little bit with the Switchbacks being on the mountains all over the place, but there's really no other place that it makes sense to have a name like that. It's awesome. Um, but one of the things after hearing your guys' story and also doing some reading about you before the call, that I learned was how important it was for you guys to have the right decision makers in place and to have the right conversations before you guys went into everything. Um, what what would you, I guess, say to those that are starting a club or looking to expand their club in terms of how do you get involved with the organizations like the city and the community to make sure that you're going to have a positive impact moving forward? Because you guys did a really good job of that, getting the city on your side to push forward your idea of not just the franchise, but the new stadium that opened a few years ago, and as well as a bunch of other stuff, and then building that foundational level of community that you were talking about, which also comes across in everything that I read about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons in this little backstory, and then it'll lead into getting the right people on board. One of the reasons we chose Colorado Springs, and when we talked with the league, because we were in relationship with Major League Soccer, the Denver Metro was off limits as far as that being an optional market to place our franchise. So we were looking at with the target of a minimum 500,000 person market. Is it Colorado Springs? Is it northern Colorado, like Fort Collins, Loveland, Greeley? Because you could draw the circles so the metro area was large enough, even though each of those cities is smaller. We chose Colorado Springs for a couple of reasons, but one of the most important reasons was because they were working on a project called the City for Champions, and the state of Colorado had created a program under, at the time, Governor Hickenlooper, that was called the Regional Tourism Act. And what they were trying to do is create a funding mechanism for communities that created awesome projects that attracted new out-of-state visitors. And if you could prove that, then over 30 years, they would allow you to, or basically pay you the increase in sales tax collections that they received at the state level to help fund those projects. So Colorado Springs put this project together based on the Olympic Museum that's now a block from our stadium. The Olympic Museum was the core of it. It was called City for Champions, but there were 5 projects. There was the Olympic Museum, there was a baseball stadium, there was an indoor sports complex, there was a medical facility, and then there was an Air Force Academy Visitor Center project. And so these were the projects. And the opportunity for us, as we looked at Colorado Springs, is that the baseball team owner had not jumped on board with this project concept because I'm not sure exactly why, but they hadn't jumped on board. I think it had to do with funding. Are they going to, is the city going to build all of it, or are you going to give us a little bit of funding and then we're going to have to come up with the difference? I think they knew and understood the value of a AAA stadium. And to be honest, and to be fair, our market didn't do a good job of really appreciating a AAA baseball team in this small market. And so we ended up losing it. And I think it's a pretty fair reason why they left. But anyways, they weren't on board supporting the project. And so as this group was pitching the idea to the state, the state was going to have the question, okay, you're building this stadium. You don't even have a tenant that's here that's willing to speak on behalf of the project. And so we filled that role. Even though the drawings all showed a baseball stadium, we went with this group to help pitch this idea of a stadium. And, we were going to be and willing to be tenants in there. And so that was kind of the start of it. As I said, it was a baseball stadium. And the history of baseball in Colorado Springs goes back to the 50s when, again, it was the Sky Sox that had a team here, played at a couple different venues. But, AAA baseball is not a small thing, especially for a market this size. And the mayor at the time, not when we came down, but the new mayor in 2015, he was a baseball guy and he loved baseball and he didn't know or appreciate soccer. He grew up in Colorado Springs, and he is an exact model of all the other people that we're trying to bring and expose the game to in the right way, but it just hadn't been done yet. He understood baseball. He appreciated, he loved baseball. He knew that it could be successful in this market. And so we had to spend a lot of time really getting him comfortable, getting him exposed, bringing him out to games, honoring. I was looking through pictures. For some reason, I was doing this yesterday. I was looking through a couple of pictures from our very first game, and we actually presented him a ball in that very first game. And so it was all that process of getting him on board, because it came pretty much I wouldn't say 7 years, it's more like 4 years to really get him comfortable enough where he could really stand behind our project. And it was really when we were able to bring in not just the Ragain family, but brought on Dean Widener as a real estate developer adjacent to the stadium, that made this project much bigger and much more, well-funded, well-developed, doing this together with a developer and a stadium together. Because really, if you're going to build a stadium or buy a franchise today, you should really be thinking about real estate development and not just a sports franchise where I'm selling tickets and sponsorships. You really need to be benefiting from the foot traffic and the energy that you're generating in adjacent real estate. And if you're not doing that, if you're not capturing that and somebody else is, at some point in your ownership, unless you have just tons of money and don't really care about losing money, usually there's a point where people say, why am I doing this? Why am I going to continue to invest? So real estate development is a really important part of owning sports franchises these days. But going back to getting the mayor on board, that was a critical thing. There was a lot, with 500,000 people, you're going to have, pockets of people that are just super jazzed about the sports franchise and the Switchbacks coming here. Unfortunately, that pocket of people wasn't really big enough. So we needed to be growing outside of that. And as I had mentioned earlier, the overall general feeling mentality of our market is a suburban mentality, which is anything important happens in Denver, not in Colorado Springs. So we're like, how do we break that? One of our slogans from the beginning has been, and it's not a unique slogan, but we just twisted it a little bit because having the community take ownership over this was big for us. And so we just tweaked to my city, my team, because we wanted that slogan on everything that we put out there. We wanted people repeating that, and internalizing that this is your city, this is your team. Those are important things, and that means something. And, whether or not those marketing elements work, that's the idea behind it. And I think people latched onto that. We're still growing. We're still, exposing the game to new people every game. We know when we have a group night, we know the fan experience in the venue is going to be a little soft. We know that, like how I was mentioning with those officials, the missed officials calls, people were just blowing up. When we have big group nights, we know that's not how it's going to be. It's going to be a lot quieter. And so that's when we really talk to our supporters group that, is still, working and trying to cohesively develop. But then even our mascot, we're like, we need to be throwing out free t-shirts early on in this game because people are nuts for free stuff. I don't know. It's not fair. It's not fair when you put all this effort into putting a great experience on the field together, and trying to get people, excited about that. And you throw a $10 t-shirt in the stands and people go bananas. So it's pairing some of those weird things like that, and using that as a platform to, kind of break the ice on the game and get people loosened up and excited about cheering for the team. But yeah, as far as other people, I mentioned Dean Widener, who's a partner with the Ragain family in executing both the stadium and the operations of the franchise itself. And Widener Apartment Homes, and Robert Carr was the regional rep at that time. And we got him involved in being a partner with us back in 2015, 2016, so very early on. And it's been a great story and evolution of how that partnership developed, because they started in a small way with tickets, then they ramped up to sponsoring the back of the jersey, then the front of the jersey, then the stadium. It was Widener Field out at that site. And then now they're a business partner with us. The stadium is named for them still here. And then they're developing all this adjacent. They're developing 1,200 apartment units adjacent to the stadium, plus first and second story commercial and retail. It's pretty awesome growth. And Dean Widener himself, he was from Colorado Springs, but he's in Seattle, but he still has family in the area. And then he had people like Robert Carr, at the time, the regional vice president, who was just a big community advocate. And he saw and latched onto what we were trying to do and became a great partner in the process. And there's several stories of partners who have been with us since day one that get it, and they see what we're trying to do, appreciate it, understand it's not easy, and have been with us for a long time and have really helped us, to where we are today. So there's several stories like that, but without those stories, we're not here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think and it takes a collective to make something like this happen, not just internally within the club, but all of these external stakeholders, partners that you need to work with to make it happen. And within all of that, a crucial element is, of course, how you manage those relationships. So you spoke about the mayor giving him the ball. What are some lessons, I guess, you have learned in that area of relationship management, of making sure that you go from not knowing this person and without it being some sort of transactional, I need you to do this, so I'll do this for you, but actually nurturing and building these relationships because you care about them and because it matters, not just for the benefit of the Switchbacks, but for the community, for everything that this encapsulates. What are some lessons on relationship management that you've learned, either the easy way through this or the hard way, if you've made any mistakes that you wish you could go back and do differently?
Well, we always make mistakes, but I think the main recommendation is never burn bridges. Never burn bridges. Even if the relationship is not a great relationship, keep the door open for something to happen in the future, because especially us, we're a small market. If we start burning relationships and creating a bad story, bad experiences, things, and we're always going to make mistakes, but we'll work to fix our mistakes and make sure that any communication in the market is going to be generally positive. We always have, we don't have a lot of competition in our market, but when we were getting started, the baseball team, they would, there was a lot of negative chatter that they created because they just saw us as strictly competition. So we did have to fight and battle through some of that. And at the same time, it was important not to really throw them under the bus and approach the conversation maybe the same way that we were being treated. We had to rise above that a little bit, both because the sport itself, we needed opportunities to present the game in the right way to get people to come out, and we couldn't rely on the strength of anything else other than relationships in order to grow and develop. We've hired different ticketing sales staff from NFL, from MLB, from even the Rapids in the past. What we do here and the effort that we have to put in is a much higher level of effort than those ticketing agents had to put in at those different franchises. The level of care, the level of attention, the level of detail, and for lesser dollars. So it's challenging, right? We don't have those types of ticketing agents on our team because they don't get it. And in one sense, it's not fair, because I'd love to have that job where things just roll up and you're just, it's just transactional. You're just taking money. That's not how it works for us. And that relationship piece, and I think I think this helps, support and answer your question. How do those relational things, how do you develop those? The one thing I say about sports, that's the best thing about sports, is it creates this open opportunity. People's doors are almost always open to talking about the game. I'm not selling insurance. I'm not, just a normal guy that's trying to, have this transactional experience. What I'm trying to do is get you to come out to a game, come enjoy it, come sit with me, watch the game, enjoy it. Let's talk. Let's have a conversation. What's your family like? What you tell me about your kids? All this kind of stuff. That's been, how we've approached, and being a family business ourselves. We can kind of communicate, in a way that people, appreciate and doesn't feel as transactional, knowing that if we're just approaching transactionally, we have no chance. This is about relationships. So the cool thing is doors are a lot of times open, and then we have this cool environment. Owning a business before, I'd had experience of going to these networking meetings. I'm not sure if you guys do this networking stuff. I hate networking things. Everybody's there and they're talking to you because they want something in return. And you just feel this tension in the room. And what's beautiful about, and when I tell people, don't go to networking events, go to a sporting event. You need to come out to a sporting event. We created a business club. And in our business club, it's just business owners buying tickets in there and just connecting around the game, watching the game. My argument was that you build and develop relationships a lot faster if there's, some other thing that's maybe bigger than you that is, kind of attracting both of your attentions, and you're like on the same team rooting for, this, the Switchbacks, for example. Those relationships actually develop much faster than if I'm in this networking meeting and we're both trying to exchange our cards so that we can buy stuff from each other or have this minimum we need to do. I hate stuff like that. And what sports offers is a much different space to develop those relationships. And so it's been fun to be a part of that part of the game.
Yeah, that is so true. And just kind of touching on what Matt was saying and what you even echoed is having those long-lasting partnerships from the beginning and the get-go of your club is something we've seen time and time again from the people who we've spoken to that have founded teams. Is they rarely ever get far, as we can see with the club that we were a part of, if you don't have at least one foundational member partnership that is going to be with you for the long haul and just kind of continue to support you going forward. And that what you were saying at the end there about building those relationships, kind of looking at the being on one side and looking at the team and then being able to relate it as that versus at a networking event where you're just trying to exchange contact information and try and get something from one another. That's really important because that's more about just building community rather than the relationship and the business relationship.
100%.
And that's something that you guys have done really well, not just at that level of building those partnerships, but also with your fans and just getting people involved in the game. And that's something that I wanted to touch on is now that you guys have your fan base, you have those existing partnerships, and now you have that new stadium that you guys opened recently. What are you looking at as kind of one of the next steps for the club? And then on top of that, how far are you looking in advance as the president of the club? Like, are you looking beyond the 2026 World Cup and the attention that's going to bring, or is everything kind of focused on just this next year? I mean, obviously there's going to be some long-term goals, but like how far out is your attention level on kind of a week-to-week basis?
Yeah, great question. We're having conversations about the next 5 and 10 years. And what does the USL Championship, what does the USL look like in 5 to 10 years? And once we kind of latch on and understand what it's going to look like, then what do we need to do in our market? So what we're expecting and anticipating is that as the USL, does compete for media rights. I mean, at the end of the day, of all the sports leagues in the US and around the world, the real greenfield opportunity is in the media rights space. There's only so many tickets you can sell. There's only so many sponsorships you can sell. That media rights space is really important. And being a second division, as the USL Championship is, there's really no second division of any other sport in the US that has a really strong media rights deal. And even obviously our first division, Major League Soccer, they have to work very hard on their media rights deals and, are not on the same pace as the other Division I sports leagues in the US. So what's our hope? Because that's really important. And so some of the things that we think about amongst the other teams and with the league is how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we create an opportunity for people and new eyeballs to be excited and interested in our product differently? And there's a few different ways. And I know very publicly there were some conversations last year about promotion relegation conversations that the USL was having. Those haven't developed. But behind the scenes, there are, continued conversations about how do we differentiate ourselves. That could be one way that we differentiate ourselves. If that's the case, what does that look like in 5 to 10 years? And for us, the two conversations are, is our venue large enough at 8,000 seats? And then how are we developing players? Because if we create this structure where we have a USL Premier League, a USL Championship, and a USL League One, how do we compete as a small market? Right now in the USL Championship, we're both from a business and on the field. I mean, we're competitively we get frustrated occasionally, but certainly from a business standpoint, we perform at one of the best in the league. And we've done that since opening our stadium downtown. But as the game grows, and as certainly we're still competing with big markets, and those big markets start to develop the venues that are going to help them support and make separation for them in their markets, how are we going to compete? So we need to be looking at our stadium facility size. We also need to be looking at how we're developing players. And so those are really the two areas that we're focused in developing. It's going to be really challenging for us on the stadium side because our 8,000 seats is on 4.9 acres. It's in downtown Colorado Springs, and there's a lot going on adjacent to us, but we're also kind of boxed in. So we have to be pretty smart about how we do that. We're going to be limited in how we do that. But certainly that's a big part of our conversation. But then how do we develop players that can come up through the ranks and compete? So we just launched our first Switchbacks 2 team. When we came to the market, having lots of conversations with different soccer clubs, seeing how other soccer clubs had built and developed what they do, we decided, for right or for wrong, we decided we didn't really want to compete with local youth clubs. And so we've really tried to stay out of the politics because there's a lot of those politics, and we just didn't want to get involved in that. And so we've tried to do that. But since we've been here, there's been one area that is underdeveloped. And this is when the kids get up into ninth grade. And then in our market, 90% of those kids go play for their high school, which is great. But the reality is they're not the players that are going to be developing into those likely college or professional players. That's not the path. So that 10% of kids was traveling to Denver. There's a couple of clubs up there that had the level of competition for those kids to keep progressing. So we knew we had this gap in the market. And so this past year, our coaching staff, and for the first time, we elevated our head coach, which since Steve took the reins back in 2014, our head coach had always been also our sporting director. So they were making, player decisions and responsible for, scouting and all of it. Who are we bringing on? Not only just what's our strategy to win this game, but also, what's this team that we're assembling? And is there any local talent? And so the answer to that local talent piece has always been not really. But the cool thing is that this last year, we elevated our head coach, Steve Hogan, into that sporting director role. And then we elevated the first assistant into the head coach role. And so our sporting director now is looking at a little bit more globally at how we develop this game. And so we've created our first Switchbacks 2 team. And these are 14 to 18-year-old kids. Right now we're playing in basically adult leagues here locally. And then we'll focus on a few different tournaments over the course of the year. They'll also play in the USL Academy League. So there's different opportunities, different platforms for these kids, but this is that 10% group that wants to play at a higher level, that recognizes the high school path is fun, but that's not necessarily going to help them progress. And so rather than drive to Denver, we can actually do this here and do this in perhaps a little better way, a little bit more efficiently. And so that's been we've kind of stepped into that space kind of slowly, but we've seen some benefits from that. Certainly from just our training environment is a higher quality of training environment now than it was previously, especially when you get late in the season, you get injuries stack up, you get international duty. How do you even, put enough bodies on the field to have a good session? And so some of those things have really improved this year because of some of these developments. But it has been growing there for multiple years. But I think we're certainly the highest level yet. So yeah, 5 and 10 years. And then part of that is its facilities. So not only the butts and seats, but I don't know if you guys know this, but our team actually reports to the same locker room, the same building every day, and which is the same as game day. So we train on our game field. We have a field that's it's coconut, it's synthetic. Part of the state dollars that our project received expected us to be open as a venue to host other types of events. So we knew that we couldn't just be a soccer facility. We needed to be, to be bidding on bringing other events to town. Like we hosted the Premier League lacrosse here a couple of years ago, and with the goal of bringing net new people into Colorado Springs. We also host a number of concerts over the course of the season, really be a community thing. But all that was part of what the facility needs to be. So as we talk about both our team and perhaps growing our development program, we're going to need a facility to do that. So those are some of the spaces that we're talking about. Really cool thing is just 2 blocks away from us is we just demoed the coal-fired power plant. And the coal-fired power plant is going to be really difficult to build any kind of structure because of the brownfield that exists underneath the ground. Not a great site for building, but a great potential site for soccer fields. So hopefully just 2 blocks away in downtown Colorado Springs, we're going to be able to have some conversations and potentially build a facility. There's not going to be a lot of structure, but at least fields that could support additional training. So when we talk 5 and 10, player development, facilities to support that, and then facilities to support a highly competitive first team on the field.
Yeah, that's great. I think we're definitely at sort of an inflection point with soccer, generally speaking,
Yeah.
but we've spoken with a lot of folk in USL, including Jeremy Allenbo, about what this next window of time looks like, with how the game itself will grow with the World Cup coming, the Club World Cup, everything that's coming competition wise, Messi being here, of course, and all of the trickle down effect from that, and how more players will most likely come. But I think USL is going to reap so much of those benefits. And obviously, as the league evolves in whatever way the whole setup does over the next decade or so, is really exciting. Especially when it comes to USL teams now being proper clubs with academies coming underneath, with second teams, with their own training facilities and everything that comes with looking and operating and feeling like a real proper football club that you would associate with England and Europe, that has all of that ecosystem underneath, the team. So it's really exciting to see all of that coming. So thank you for sharing how you're looking at the next decade.
Yeah.
Before we look to wrap up, I want to just spend one moment, one question, looking backwards again, but not just at the switchbacks and successes on the field and off the field, but you yourself. When you look back at your own time with the switchbacks, what is one moment in particular, maybe, or one milestone or achievement that you have the most personal pride in yourself, Nick Ragain, for achieving? Not as the entire collective where you can point to this person also supporting, but you yourself, that like, I did that, or I led that, I was involved with that.
Yeah, great question. And there's 2 things that came to mind, and one is negotiating some of these deals. When we got down and sat down with Dean Widener and his team and the Reagans, I'm kind of the jelly in between both parties, understanding that both parties need to win, and there's going to be some difficult, hard areas that we're rubbing against each other in negotiations. I have to be kind of that lubricant between both parties in order to keep both parties at the table, in order to get this project done. And it requires a lot of trust on both sides, both parties. So having developed that trust, I think with partners through, we talked about relationships, and at the end of the day, it really boils down to trust. And so having developed trust with, whether it's, negotiating, the deal with the mayor, or negotiating the partnership and the stadium expansion with our partner, being the fulcrum point of which way those things are going to go, and really having to, for me, having to bring my ego down here because it'd be really hard to take this negotiation is involving millions of dollars, big things, big plans, and not elevating myself to be in a position where I'm going to, scare either party away. I got to absorb a lot of things. I have to, um, you know, um, be pretty cautious on what I say, but also be very encouraging and make sure I don't compromise the trust that's been given me so that we can sit down and we can negotiate these things. Because I think when we look back from a franchise standpoint, when we did our deal to build the stadium, we had to settle on a franchise value. And I think the franchise value that we settled on and negotiated was a good value at that time. We're actually also projecting on what our franchise value is today. And I won't get into those details, but that's also been a difficult and challenging process for reasons that I can't really explain. But again, having to reduce and lower my ego in order to get the parties open and talking and coming to an agreement and really creating the platform for that. So really, I guess, winning trust in important people so that when we come to the table and sit down with the family and sit down with these other parties, that we can come to an agreement and not blow everything up. There's been several times in our history. We're a family business. I don't know if you guys have been involved in family businesses before. There's egos in family businesses too. And egos in this family business, I mean, it could have blown up. And it would have been very easy for me personally, for my ego to be up here and just choose the nuclear option and everything falls apart. And I think that's probably been the biggest contribution of myself to the Switchbacks is taking that ego and trying to dial it down. It's not easy, but trying to reduce the ego because something else is more important than me getting to make all the decisions. Something else is more important than me looking good. Now, one of the benefits of that is that I get a lot of credit for a lot of things that happen that that really is not my direct work. And as the president, you tend to get bigger blames and bigger credit. In these past few years, there's been a lot of positive things, so I tend to get a lot of credit. So that's nice for the ego, but the reality is in these relationships, I'm not the one at the end of the day that's really driving that hard bargain. I'm really creating the platform and reducing my ego so we can figure out these things and be successful. So yeah, I would say that's the best thing. But one of the best experiences I had a mom who came up last year, and the story is that she and her husband and two kids, she and her husband were dating when they first came out to our Switchbacks games originally. And she came up just with tears in her eyes because she was just overjoyed at that particular moment. Her daughter had made a sign for the Switchbacks, and we welcomed her into this. It was before the game. She was walking by, and she came into the owner's suite, and we were just talking and catching up. And her daughter had made this Switchback sign, but she was just in tears because of thinking back when she first started coming to the games, like wasn't married and no kids, and the Switchbacks had been such a part of her family life and development, and that community, filling that community space, that bringing all these people together, her husband and her together, and now her kids, multiple daughters, and just seeing that, it was a special moment because my kids were very young. There's been so many things, so much community and love that has grown out of the franchise that is pretty proud. I'm pretty proud to have been a part of.
Definitely. That's amazing. And that's, I think, a common theme. We ask that question a lot, or some form of it, and it always comes back to community and people and the impact you actually leave on a person, not just results on the pitch and bringing a stadium to life, and all of the tangible things that you've been able to create, but the actual imprint on someone's life that what you have created has made in someone's day-to-day life and their family life and their personal life is always what it always comes back to. So I'm happy to hear that that's the same case for you. But Absolutely. Nick, this has been amazing. I'm sure I could definitely speak for about another 2 hours. There's a lot more that I would love to ask. So we'll have to have you back on in the future, but thank you so much for your time today, sharing your minutes with us, your insights with us, and of course, the amazing story that is the Switchbacks and what you've been able to do as yourself and as a family. And to your point, family businesses always come with issues and drama, and sports also comes with issues and drama. So I'd imagine there's been a lot of fires you've had to extinguish and work through, but
humbleness
from the outside, but from the outside, you've been doing clearly an amazing job. So kudos to everything you've been doing. You're pushing the sport forward, which is what we're all here for, to enjoy and embrace. So thank you for everything today, and best of luck for the rest of the season. You're sitting nicely in terms of the standings, so best of luck for the playoffs and everything that comes next, and we'll be cheering along from the side.
Oh, thank you so much, Matthew, David. Appreciate you guys. Also, your work in growing the game. It's about conversations, people. So.
Definitely. All right. Thank you, Nick.
Take care.
Thanks for watching this episode of Off the Pitch. Don't forget to drop a follow or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from. That helps us bring stories like these to your ears each and every week. And if you have a minute, leave a review as well, as that helps us grow the Off the Pitch community and bring even more exciting guests on. See you in the next one.